Bruce Springsteen stopped concert after fans screamed, "Your father was right." What happened next shook 15,000 people. The Meadowlands Arena, December 12, 1982. Bruce Springsteen was 90 minutes into what Rolling Stone would later call the most emotionally raw performance of his career. When someone in the crowd screamed 8 words that cut through 15,000 voices and stopped the E Street Band cold. The Nebraska tour had been Bruce's most personal yet. But nothing had prepared him for this moment, when his family's darkest secret would be thrown back at him from the darkness of a New Jersey arena. What happened in the next 12 minutes didn't just silence a crowd. It revealed a buried truth that would change how America understood the man behind Born to Run forever. If stories like this move you, hit subscribe. This gets unbelievable. December 12th, 1982. East Rutherford, New Jersey. The Nebraska album had stripped Bruce down to his core. No E Street Band. Just him, a guitar, and the kind of darkness that only comes from looking too deep into America's broken promises. The album had been recorded in his bedroom on a 4-track cassette player. Songs about killers and drifters and the people that America forgot. Critics called it his most honest work. Fans called it depressing. But tonight was different. Tonight, he had the band back, and they were playing to a home crowd that knew every word of every song. Bruce walked onto the stage that December night, carrying something heavier than usual. His father, Douglas Springsteen, had died just 14 months earlier, in September 1981. They'd never reconciled. Never had the conversation that Bruce had been rehearsing in his head for 30 years. All those songs about fathers and sons, about working-class dignity and broken dreams, and he'd never been able to explain to his own father what he was trying to do with his music. Douglas had worked at the Carragusian rug mill in Freehold for most of Bruce's childhood, a factory job that paid the bills but crushed something inside him a little more each day. He'd come home with his hands stained from the dyes, his back aching, and Bruce would be in his room with a guitar, playing the same chords over and over, dreaming of something bigger than their small New Jersey town. "Music won't pay the bills, Bruce," Douglas would say. "Music won't put food on the table." But Bruce kept playing, kept dreaming, kept believing that maybe, just maybe, he could build something lasting with melodies and words. The tension between them had grown worse as Bruce's career took off. When Born to Run made him famous in 1975, Douglas didn't congratulate him. When Bruce started selling out arenas, Douglas would tell neighbors that his son was still just playing music. When magazines started calling Bruce the future of rock and roll, Douglas would shake his head and say, he could have been an electrician. Good, steady work. They'd barely spoken in the last 5 years of Douglas's life. Bruce would come home for holidays, sit at the kitchen table where he'd eaten breakfast as a kid, and try to find words that would bridge the gap between them. But Douglas would just look at him like he was still that stubborn teenager who'd rather play guitar than look for a real job. The funeral had been quiet, small. Douglas's co-workers from the rug mill came to pay their respects. Bruce stood by the casket in a black suit, accepting condolences from men who had worked alongside his father for decades. Men who spoke about Douglas with a respect that Bruce had never heard when his father talked about him. "Good man, your father," they'd say. "Honest worker. Never complained, no matter how hard the work got. Always talked about his family." But none of them mentioned what Douglas had said about Bruce. Not at the funeral. That would come later. Tonight's concert had started like any other show on the tour. Bruce and the E Street Band tearing through the hits, the crowd singing along to every word. But as the night went on, Bruce found himself talking to the audience more than usual, telling stories between songs, opening up in a way that felt different, more vulnerable. They'd just finished The River, that haunting song about young love and broken dreams and the way life rarely turns out the way you planned. The crowd was still applauding when Bruce walked to the microphone. "This next song," Bruce said, his voice carrying that familiar rasp that came from years of singing his heart out in clubs and arenas. "It's about fathers and sons, about the weight that gets passed down whether you want it or not." He paused, looking out at the sea of faces. 15,000 people who had come to hear him sing about their lives, their struggles, their dreams. "Sometimes," Bruce continued, "the hardest person to reach is the one who's supposed to love you no matter what." The opening chords of My Father's House filled the arena. It was a new song, one that wouldn't appear on an album for another 5 years. But tonight, it felt necessary. A song about a son driving past his childhood home, trying to make peace with a father who was already gone. "Last night I dreamed that I was a child, out where the pines grow wild and tall. I was trying to make it home through the forest. Before the darkness falls." The crowd fell into that respectful silence that only happens when an artist goes to the deepest place. Bruce's voice filled the arena, raw and vulnerable, singing about childhood fears and adult regrets. He was halfway through the second verse when it happened. "Your father was right about you." The voice came from somewhere in the darkness of section 104. Male, older, carrying decades of anger and something that sounded like satisfaction. "You never were worth a damn." The music stopped. Not a gradual fade, just stopped, like someone had pulled the plug on the entire arena. Clarence Clemens' saxophone hung silent. Roy Bitten's hands froze above the piano keys. Max Weinberg's drumsticks stopped mid-beat. Bruce stood at the microphone, his hand still gripping his guitar neck, staring into the crowd. The silence was complete. 15,000 people holding their breath, unsure if they'd really heard what they thought they'd heard. Security guards were already moving through the crowd, trying to locate the source of the voice. But Bruce held up his hand, stopping them. "Sir," Bruce said, his voice steady but different. Quieter, like he was talking to one person instead of 15,000. "Would you like to repeat that?" The arena stayed silent, waiting, because, Bruce continued, setting down his guitar and walking closer to the edge of the stage, "It sounds like you knew my father." What happened next revealed a secret that Douglas Springsteen had carried to his grave 2 years earlier. The voice came again, closer now. The man had moved down toward the stage, and security was following him. But Bruce waved them off with a gesture that was both commanding and gentle. Doug Springsteen told everyone at Karaguzian Rug Mill that his son was wasting his life playing music. Said you'd never amount to nothing. Said you were breaking your mother's heart with all this foolishness. Guess he was wrong about that part. The words hit Bruce like physical blows. He'd suspected that his father talked about him at work, but he'd never known what Douglas actually said. Never knew that his father's disappointment had been public, shared with coworkers during lunch breaks and coffee breaks and the long shifts that stretched through New Jersey afternoons. Bruce walked to the very edge of the stage, close enough now that he could see the man in the crowd. Older, maybe 65. Wearing a heavy winter coat and a cap that looked like something factory workers wore. His face was weathered, lined with the kind of deep creases that come from decades of hard work and harder winters. "What's your name?" Bruce asked. "Bill Kowalski. Worked with your old man for 32 years. Started the same week he did back in 1949. Heard him talk about you plenty." The crowd was completely still. This wasn't part of any show they'd ever seen. This was something else. Something real and unscripted and dangerous in the way that only truth could be dangerous. What did he say, Bill? Said you broke your mother's heart. Said you chose music over family. Said you'd rather play in bars than be a man and get a real job. Said Adele would cry sometimes, worrying about what would happen to you when the music didn't work out. Bruce felt something cold settle in his chest. His mother, Adele, had never told him about crying. She'd always supported his music, always encouraged him to follow his dreams. But Douglas? Douglas had seen her worry and used it as ammunition in his war against his son's choices. He said that in front of everyone? Bruce asked. Every day, Bruce. Every goddamn day. During lunch, during breaks, whenever anyone would listen. My son thinks he's going to be a rock star. That's what he'd say. My son thinks music is more important than responsibility. Bill paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was softer, sadder. But you know what else he said? Bruce waited. He said you had more talent in your little finger than most people had in their whole body. Said you could have been anything you wanted if you'd just been willing to do it the right way. The right way? Like him, like us, with your hands, building something real, something you could touch. Bruce nodded slowly. He said that? After you made it big, after the record started selling, Doug would bring in Rolling Stone magazine, show us the pictures. Never said he was proud, mind you. But he'd leave the magazines in the break room where everyone could see them. What Bruce did next, nobody saw coming. He sat down on the edge of the stage, his legs hanging over the side like a kid sitting on a dock, the most famous rock star in America. Sitting on a stage in front of 15,000 people, having a conversation with a factory worker who had known his father better than he ever had. Bill, can you come up here? I think you and I need to finish a conversation my father started. Security helped Bill Kowalski make his way through the crowd and up onto the stage. When he got close, Bruce could see his father's face in Bill's weathered features. Same lines around the eyes from squinting at machinery in poor light. Same set to the jaw from years of biting back complaints about unfair bosses and impossible quotas. Same calloused hands from handling rough materials day after day. These were men who'd worked with their hands their entire lives, who'd built America one shift at a time. Bill, Bruce said, I want you to know something. My father died 2 years ago. We never worked things out. Bill stood there, uncertain now. The anger that had brought him down from the stands seemed to be draining away, replaced by something that looked almost like regret. I'm sorry, Bill said quietly. I didn't mean to, No, Bruce said. Don't apologize. I needed to hear this. What else did he say about me? Bill looked out at the crowd, 15,000 faces staring back at him, then back at Bruce. He said you were stubborn. Said you got that from him. Said once you made up your mind about something, there was no changing it. What else? He said you cared too much. About everything. About people, about music, about making things perfect. Said it would probably kill you someday, caring that much. Bruce felt tears starting. He said that. Said you were the most sensitive kid he'd ever seen. Said you'd cry at movies, cry at sad songs on the radio. Said he didn't know how to handle a boy who felt everything so deeply. The arena was so quiet you could hear individual conversations in the far sections. 15,000 people eavesdropping on the most intimate conversation many of them had ever witnessed. Bill, can I tell you what I never got to tell him? Bill nodded. I was trying to build something real too, just not with my hands, with my voice, with songs about guys like you and him, about factory workers in small towns and the promises that America makes and breaks. Bruce gestured to the crowd. Every person in this arena tonight, they're here because I've been singing about people like your father, like you. The Nebraska album? That whole record is about guys who work their whole lives and still can't get ahead, about the dignity in honest work and the tragedy when that work disappears. Bill's voice was quieter now, thoughtful. He knew that. I don't know. We stopped talking before I could explain it to him, before I could tell him that every song I wrote was trying to honor the life he lived, the sacrifices he made. Bruce paused, looking out at the crowd, then back at Bill. My father thought I was running away from responsibility, but I was running toward it, toward the responsibility to tell stories about people like him, to make sure their lives mattered, that their struggles weren't invisible. He would have understood that, Bill said. Doug was proud of you, Bruce. He just didn't know how to say it. Didn't know how to bridge the gap between his world and yours. How do you know? Because the last time I saw him, right before he got sick, he brought in that Time magazine with you on the cover. Born in the USA, it said. And Doug looked at that picture for a long time, and then he said, my boy's on the cover of Time magazine. My boy from Freehold, New Jersey. Bill's voice cracked. He said, my boy, Bruce, not my son who wastes his time with music. My boy. Bruce was crying now, not trying to hide it from the crowd or the man standing beside him or the 15,000 people who had come to hear songs, but instead were witnessing something deeper, more real than entertainment. Bill, I want to ask you something, and you can say no. But would you help me finish this song? For him? What happened next was something concert history had never seen before. Bruce and Bill, sitting side by side on the edge of the stage, sang My Father's House together. Bill didn't know most of the words, but he hummed along. And when Bruce got to the line about a son trying to make peace with his father's memory, Bill joined in with his rough, untrained voice. I stood at my father's house. The house where I was born, I stood there with a heavy heart and tried to understand. 15,000 people watched two men from different generations, different worlds, find something they'd both lost. The song became a prayer, a conversation between the living and the dead, mediated by music and memory, and the strange alchemy that happens when strangers become family. After the song ended, Bruce walked Bill back to his seat personally. No cameras caught what they said to each other during that long walk through the arena. But people nearby reported that both men were crying, that they stopped several times to embrace, that Bruce gave Bill something, a guitar pick, a set list, some small token that seemed to carry enormous weight. The concert continued, but something had changed. Bruce played differently for the rest of the night, gentler, more connected, like he was singing to one person instead of 15,000. Like he'd found something he'd been looking for his entire career. The story didn't end that night. Bill Kowalski started attending Bruce's shows regularly. Always sat in the same section when Bruce came to New Jersey. Always wore the same heavy winter coat and factory worker's cap. Bruce would find him after shows sometimes, and they'd talk about Douglas Springsteen, about factory work, about the different ways men show love when they don't have the words for it directly. Bill became Bruce's connection to his father's world, the bridge that Douglas had never been able to build himself. Through Bill, Bruce learned about his father's daily life at the mill, about the jokes he told during lunch breaks, about the way he defended other workers when management tried to cut corners on safety. Bruce learned that his father had been respected by his co-workers, that they'd seen qualities in Douglas that Bruce had never been allowed to see. When Bill passed away in 1989, Bruce was at the funeral, a small service in a Catholic church in Freehold, attended mostly by retired factory workers and their families. Bruce sang "My Father's House" at the service, but this time he changed one line. Instead of singing about searching for his father's house, he sang about finding it, about finally understanding that home wasn't a place, but a feeling, a connection that could bridge even the deepest misunderstandings. Years later, in a 1995 interview with Rolling Stone, someone asked Bruce about that night at the Meadowlands, about why he didn't have security remove Bill when he first started shouting from the crowd. Bruce's answer was simple but profound. Because he was carrying something that belonged to me, something my father never got the chance to give me directly. What was that? The truth. About how hard it is to be proud of a son when you don't understand what he's trying to build. About how love and disappointment can exist in the same heart. How you can want the best for someone while being terrified that their dreams will destroy them. Bruce paused, considering his words carefully. Bill taught me that my father's criticism came from love, not indifference. That when Douglas told his co-workers I was wasting my life, he was really saying he was afraid I'd get hurt. That when he brought my magazine covers to work, he was trying to understand this thing his son had built. This career that looked so different from anything he knew, but was clearly succeeding in ways he'd never imagined possible. The December 12, 1982 concert became legendary among Bruce Springsteen fans. Bootlegs of that show still circulate, passed from collector to collector like sacred texts. But the recordings can't capture what people felt in that arena when two strangers found a way to honor a dead man's complicated love. They can't capture the moment when 15,000 people realized they were witnessing something more important than entertainment. They can't capture the sound of grown men crying in public, or the way the entire arena seemed to exhale when Bruce and Bill embraced after singing together. That night changed Bruce's relationship with his music and his audience. He began talking more openly about his father in interviews, about the working-class roots that had shaped his worldview. He started dedicating songs to factory workers and union members and anyone who'd ever felt like their labor was invisible. Most importantly, he learned that his audience wasn't just there for the music. They were there for the connection, for the recognition, for someone to acknowledge that their lives had dignity and meaning, even when the world seemed to overlook them. Some moments change everything. Some secrets need to be spoken out loud. And sometimes the most important conversation you'll ever have is with someone who knew the person you could never reach. Sometimes a stranger carries the key to understanding your own father. If this story moved you, make sure to subscribe for more untold stories about the moments that changed music forever. Hit that like button and tell us in the comments about a conversation you wish you could have had. This is Bruce Springsteen, The Untold Legacy. We'll see you next time. Claude is AI and can make mistakes. Please double-check responses. Sonnet 4 Claude is AI and can make mistakes. Please double-check.